Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. A lot of you I've been in contact with on a daily basis, but we wanted to provide an opportunity for you to speak with Dr. McCormick, for you to submit some questions, and for her to be able to answer those and talk on education. Obviously, a lot of things have been moving. The staff and Dr. McCormick have been involved heavily behind the scenes with legislators, with the governor's office, with educators across the state to provide resources and do what we can. And so what we've done today is we've actually adjusted the format just a little bit. So based on your questions, we are allowing that to drive the conversation. We looked at the questions. We got a lot of great questions. Some were the same, some were different, some were very unique. And what we wanted to do was actually take those questions and then bucket today's conversation by topic. I think what you'll find is this format will be very easy to follow, very fluid, and will actually answer a lot of your questions. In saying that, if we get to the end and you feel like your question hasn't been answered or you have some additional follow-up questions, obviously I'm always available. You've got my contact information. Give me a call, give me a text or email, let me know, and we'll go from there. I wanted to touch briefly on one of the things that IDOE has been doing. A lot of you are aware of this. I've provided this document to you. If not, you can go to our website. It's on our COVID-19 page. But from the very beginning, we did what we've always done: help schools, provide resources, assist. And as we got into this entire situation, began looking at the areas in which schools really needed resources and how could we make it very clean, very clear to educators, to public, and to the parents who obviously want to know how is the state helping, what resources are available to my school. And so we created a document which is essentially puts in 4 areas our resources and how we're addressing the needs of school. And so those 4 areas, if you haven't seen the document, reach out to me, I'll give you that document. But essentially, ensuring essential resources, providing academic supports, engaging educators, and providing guidance. So we sort of bucketed all of our resources into those 4 areas, and that allows us to provide clarity to the public, to you, to parents, even to high school students that have been emailing us and asking us questions about their future and the situation that they're going in as well. And that allows us to be very clear and very upfront and transparent in how we're helping schools. So again, if you don't have that document, if you want to know more about it, reach out to me. But let's get into today's format. So again, we've got about 5 topics we're going to jump into. I will give you a quick overview of those topics. We're going to talk today a little bit about remote learning and closing out this school year. Obviously, that's a big deal and getting through the end of that. Then we're going to talk about reentry and summer school. What's next, what's ahead. We'll talk about the policy impact and the funding, what areas, what's being provided, what's available, and what's affected. We're going to talk about personal well-being and social-emotional learning. Obviously, a lot of you have asked me questions about how important this is and how students are working through that. There was a great story today in the Indy Star about that as well, about some of our students and how they're working through that as well. And then we're going to close out with the operations of the department, how we've been working with schools, what we've been providing schools, and so on. And so at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. McCormick, and we'll go from there.
So first of all, I want to thank Adam. I know he's been fielding a lot of your calls, and I know that relationship is good, so I appreciate his work and our entire comms team, including our great camera folks and our supportive comms people, but also to all of you. You have been good to our office throughout my entire term, and this is no different. So I know that COVID has been difficult on all of us. I just, from a personal standpoint, want to thank you. I think the coverage of COVID, although sometimes you become COVID weary, has been good. It's been as honest as we can make it. I think it's been very transparent. So to all of you who are doing your jobs in a different manner like all of us, I commend you, and I appreciate what you're doing and how you're trying to keep us all informed. Our parents rely on you a great deal, and that's the reality of it. There are a lot of people reading print right now, they're online, they're watching TV, and it's extremely important that they get the right information. So thank you for what you do. And with that, I'm going to just jump into conversation. I know, Adam, again, if there are questions that you don't feel are answered, you can reach back out to Adam, and he will make sure you get those answers. So the continuous learning plans, those were due from each district. If you remember correctly in the governor's executive order when we talked about the waiver days, in order to be eligible for that, that's one that they had to turn at schools, all schools, traditional, charter, and non-pubs receiving vouchers, so your choice scholarship schools, had to turn in a continuous learning plan. Those were due last Friday. Interestingly, we do a lot of chasing here at the department. Some of you have heard me talk about that, where things are due and you just struggle to get it get people to turn them in on a timely manner, which is frustrating at best. But this one, we had a pretty good turnout. So right now, we're sitting at 97% of the traditional publics have turned it in, 90% of charter, and 99% of non-pub. So I'm super happy with that right now. We're going to make some phone calls, and our goal is to get those taken care of and get them in as soon as possible. Many of them that we have received look good. We have over 500 that have been turned in and returned. We have just about 50-ish that were returned back to say, you know what, you need a little bit more meat to that. And then we have some that just we're struggling, about 11, so very, very few in the state of Indiana that we just can't get the link or communications, or it's those are the outliers. But we'll get it. We'll chase it down. So, but the learning plans have been quite interesting, the continuous learning plans. Many of them have done an excellent job. We have about 200 that are currently under review that we will get back to them, but our team has done an amazing job. But just so that you know, most schools have done what they were asked to do. Those who didn't, we will make sure we get those. Instructional hours and the instructional quality, the hours and attendance is always a question. We leave a lot of that to local to make the decision on what instruction looks like, to set the expectations for the rigor of that academics, and how do they count attendance. So e-learning can be quite different. When I was a local superintendent, we conducted almost a decade ago e-learning, and we did it not long-term. We did it for inclement weather days at the beginning, and that wasn't the day of, that was on an off day, because it's very difficult to do, in my opinion, to the quality and to the level that is effective for all involved. It's tough. So given the scenario right now where we only had about 25% of our districts that had even used e-learning up until this point for any purpose, and it was usually very short term, whether it was professional development, inclement weather, just extreme emergencies, that they use that. We're now at the situation where we've asked another 75% of our schools to jump on board, and that is a huge lift for many of our districts. So given the scenario, many are using the high tech, many are using low tech, some are still using, and I say low tech, paper pencil, but that continuous learning's all over the place. But the quality of it, that we know we have some work to do, but a lot of that is dependent upon the professional development that's available, leadership, the buy-in from the teachers, the buy-in from the community, and the buy-in from the students. For us to expect students to be ready without ever having used that mode of learning before, although they are very tech savvy, doesn't mean they are good tech learners. So we are, really working with districts for our end to provide resources, to provide professional development so that schools are put in a better situation with that rigor and the quality piece. The attendance gets tricky. So many are they're all doing it differently, whether that's based on participation or an hourly, or actually a turn-in of an assignment, or participation in a Zoom, in a chat type of situation. It's just all over the place based on the individual teacher, the individual school, the individual district. So attendance is a piece of this. Thankfully, from the feds, we got a waiver from accountability in the attendance arena, so we want kids to still participate. We want them to be active learners, but yet we have to allow that flexibility at the local level, so we will continue to do so. Many people are helping each other, so that capacity development, they're trying to figure out who do they need to reach out to that maybe were in those early 25%ers who can give guidance and encouragement and resources to those who maybe weren't early adopters of this. The quality, in my opinion, is a direct reflection of leadership. It's a direct reflection of commitment, but also I am not naive, and a lot of it's tied to funding. So for us to expect those districts who are fiscally strapped to have a lot of money or capacity for device or access or professional development or tech integration positions or coaches is just not realistic. A lot of our districts have small but mighty tech teams. Maybe they have a tech integrationist if they're lucky. Maybe they're paying a stipend to a few teachers who are your rock star superstars in the tech world and in the e-learning blended world. Maybe not. And so money has a lot to do with this. And I know people can say, well, take the CARES money, the federal money, and put it toward that. There are a lot of needs right now. And obviously this is one, but we also are very cognizant of we're trying to do everything we can do free to help provide that support when districts are strapped for cash at this point. A lot of people are doing that hybrid approach. So when we got our data back, many of them are doing e-learning and traditional paper pencil, kind of a hybrid. Many of them are doing less than 5 days a week of e-learning because it's very taxing on a family. We have a lot of families that may only have a single device and have 4 or 5 people within the family, including the adults who need it for their jobs or for whatever they need it for. And then you've got kids who are needing it at different times for different purposes. Knowing that and being cognizant of the workload in that home and the stressors that brings, also access. We've had some families reach out and say, this hybrid piece of you're doing it 3 days a week, but my evenings I'm sitting at McDonald's parking lot trying to get access, and it's taking a toll on me because I'm trying to work. I've got little kids at home. I've got 3 kids in school. And the stressors are really heightened. So schools are working with families, but as a state level, we're very cognizant of that. Again, trying to provide guidance to schools on how many hours does e-learning actually take? What's that hour to hour, minute to minute piece look like, which we'll talk about. Observation, those who are very concerned about some interesting observations during this time. So back when I started as a principal superintendent early on, we heard a lot of people be very dismissive of seat time. And it really doesn't matter about seat time. Seat time's not an issue. Those very same people are pretty concerned about seat time right now. That's been a whole interesting dynamic to watch play out. And if you were around more than a decade ago or so in Indiana, you saw that playing out where seat time didn't matter, competency-based learning, let them test out, get out of there, not concerned about seat time, and high-performing schools got a lot of flexibility. And now a lot of those same people have a very different tune, and that's been quite interesting to watch. Also, there's in Indiana, we've had our fair share of virtual school issues, and those who are very, very steadfast and supportive of that now are really asking a lot of questions when the traditional public school arena looks very different, and that too has been an interesting dynamic to watch as far as the big-time supporters of the virtual schools are now maybe not as supportive of the traditional schools living in that for a long term. And so we're having those conversations, but watching all that, but that's just the interesting dynamic that happens in Indiana. Special education concerns, there have been many. Having been a special education teacher in my past life, I understand when students need and deserve services, we're going to work really hard to make sure those students get what they need and what they deserve, and all local schools are very committed to that. But this has been a very tricky time, and I'm not going to try to sugarcoat it. Very tricky in the means of how do you evaluate students who need to be evaluated for placement into special services? How do you re-evaluate students who need to be provided into either continuing services or reevaluate their actual what services they're already getting? That's been tricky with timelines, with parent barriers, trying to get that communication with parents. It's tough to do sometimes in a traditional manner, let alone now. We have a lot of mobility right now being reported from our districts as far as our students of poverty, our EL population. Some of our special education students fall under either or of those areas, and so that's been difficult as well. The feds did provide a little bit of flexibility on how we can run case conferences. That's been a challenge for some of our districts. We are trying to do as much on the phone or over the internet, like a Zoom type of situation, but that's not always easy to do, depending on the district, depending on the access to the parent, whether they have connectivity at home, whether they're willing to pick up the phone and have that conversation. It's not as easy as it may seem. The move-in situation has been really interesting for districts. So if I'm a child and I actually physically move into the boundaries of the district, it's not a transfer situation, but I actually physically move in, your timeline is ticking. So first of all, you have to know that the child's moved in, then you have to do the evaluation at the move-in. And so that has been pretty interesting for people, and the guidance from the feds was get creative, and people are trying to get creative, but too, you are under some tight parameters that prohibit some of that creativity. So the special ed piece has been a real challenge. There have been opportunities come from that. I know in some of the support services like OT, PT, they've been quite creative on making sure our students get services, whether it's online, through packets, through family health plans, different ways that I commend them. So people are doing the best they can, from our special ed co-ops to our interlocals, to the individual districts, down all the way to that classroom level and the instructional aides, all doing their part to make sure those students are getting what they deserve. Professional development in this world for special education is going to be for all educators, but especially for special education educators, I think it's going to be extremely, extremely important, just because it is different. It's a different platform. It's a different approach. You have a lot of accommodations and modifications and needs that have to be met that not necessarily are quite to the level of challenge for a gen ed student. So all of that being said, again, there are challenges with it. We're also going to look for opportunities with it and ways that technology can enhance some of those services. But in the same breath, we know that the same students where technology is a huge enhancement sometimes can be a barrier. So we're working through that balance. Internet access in Indiana has been quite a challenge. So here's what I will say. This is not a school issue. I go back to, if the kids are at school in a traditional manner, if students are at most of our schools in Indiana, access to the internet and speed is not an issue. It's not. The access, in my opinion, is a statewide issue. Our communities, our town, our rural areas, our suburban, our urban areas, that's our infrastructure that we should be putting dollars, significant dollars behind. And I know from the feds some of those opportunities are coming. But it is a challenge as a state. This isn't a school issue. I know schools are feeling it because of the barrier it causes, but this says schools have taken care of schools for many, many years, and at times taking care of families that needed access through different programs. But it's time, if this doesn't send the message to all states across the nation, that infrastructure is just as important as I-69 being paved or bridges being taken care of. It is the way of life, and we need to make sure all people, all citizens in the state of Indiana have access to the internet, and it needs to be of a broadband speed that is doable for what they need to utilize that for. Given at-home work now and the school piece, whether it's K-12 or higher education, it's crippling if as a state we don't take care of it. So again, not just a school issue, we're dealing with it. We're trying to find those great partners. We're trying to provide access. We're looking at how to take those dollars, whether it's CARES funds or otherwise, common school loans, operation fund, education fund. We're looking at all different mechanisms from that local lens. But this is much, much bigger than just school. Obviously, many of you have brought up the point of the inequality. So if I'm in an area where I have a laptop, I have access, and I have got pretty good speed with the broadband connectivity, that's a big advantage over I've got nothing, or I've got a device with no access, or I've got a device that is slow as molasses. I mean, there are different levels of inequality. The pandemic has really brought a lot of that to light, and it's no different than as we move forward, we're going to continue to see that, unfortunately, I think, in summer school and in the fall, depending on what happens, if we can't develop that capacity to really get some of those schools that we are targeting brought up to speed, whether that be not to do that major lift would be super, super expensive for the state, but as far as device access and then the internet access and then get training. To give a kid a device and give a kid access doesn't mean they know how to use a learning management system or know what that means to really be savvy with a course, to be able to take that type of learning without some guidance. And so many of our families haven't necessarily been exposed to that in their educational experience. So that whole piece of it needs to be considered during this time. The other piece of it that schools have known for years, even if I had great intentions and said, I have the money, I'm going to do it. Here's the reality of it. You have kids that take home a device. I live this as a superintendent. 2 days later, they'll come to you and say, mine's broken, or it's stolen, or my parents need it for class, so they're using it and I can't get my hands on it. There are a lot of different situations where then now you're looking at replacement of devices that are super expensive. And if you replace, more times than not, the same situation comes back where it's broken again, or my screen's smashed, or my little brother accidentally spilt his juice all over it, or it's gone again. So there are a lot of scenarios. I took it to my friend's house and my friend doesn't have it anymore. Took it to my grandma's, can't find it. There are just so many scenarios which that piece of it is very, very difficult, and it's not talked about a lot as far as just the management of it. The other piece of it is deployment. So many districts, I commend them, during this time I said, we have the devices, we're going to repurpose the devices that were at school, not at take-home devices, that now we're going to make at-school devices to at-home devices. You have to deploy those. You have to set those up in a special way. It's not that easy. And so at a time where we're trying to social distance and not gather and communicate to the masses, for our districts who have done that, I commend them. For those who are trying and struggling, it's real, but they're doing the best they can to try to get devices in the hands of those families. Again, a device without any type of access to the internet isn't super helpful at this point. The other piece that we're seeing is I have schools that are calling to say, look, even if we wanted devices, we can't get our hands on devices until July, August, because of the supply chain is so backed up given the situation. So we can't get internet access, whether it's Wi-Fi or whether that's through partnerships because their bills aren't paid up or whatever the case may be. But we also, the device piece of it, like the actual physical hardware, is hard to get hands on right now because of the ordering is so backlogged. So a lot of different pieces to that, the whole point of e-learning. It is a lot. It's a lot to manage. It's a lot to lead. There's a lot to it. And for us to think we're just going to turn that really quickly, it's not fair to districts. It's not realistic. But they're doing the best they can. And we know leading up to summer and leading up to fall, many of them know they're going to have to develop that capacity and really take a look at that. One positive outlook of COVID-19 is the desire now to address these needs. So sometimes before, we've offered a ton of professional development in the e-learning arena. I know back in district, we used to offer it to other districts. And it's a need-to-know moment where until you have to have it, some folks in the education world really didn't have a great appetite to learn it. Now's a great time to need to know, and educators are doing a ton of training. So that's been positive that those who maybe were a little bit more reluctant now find it relevance to keep their job and to do their job well. And that's a different urgency when you're looking at professional development. So that's been one positive to come out, that professional development has really been touching more educators and I think of quality. So it's been good. Access to resources. The department has really made a commitment to say we're going to get you resources, whether it's canned, I hate to say canned, but kind of turnkey courses or things that are easy to deploy given that everybody's not to that level of maybe developing an online course or curating digital content. It's not super easy if you've never done it before, and even if you have, it takes a lot of practice. So the DOE is really committed to using resources that are free, turnkey, that students and families and educators that are easy to understand and easy to implement. So we are doing a lot of that. E-rate flexibility has been brought up quite a bit as far as what flexibility has been provided. Home-based connectivity is through the next stimulus package is what we're hearing. So that E-rate piece may be helpful maybe in that next federal stimulus package, not state, but the federal stimulus package, which we're hoping will run through E-rate, and that will be a good thing. Currently, the only flexibility with E-rate is some filing flexibility. So funding-wise, we're hoping it will come, but the filing piece is already there. We also want to we've had a lot of local partners who have stepped up and said, how can we help, depending on their location in the state and their customer base, who that is, because it differs obviously in the state. But trying to get people some free short-term solutions to access has been truly helpful. Some of it, we've heard from parents who ran into, I can't get the free because I have an outstanding bill and I have no money to pay for the bill, and so it's a vicious cycle. So there are a lot of different scenarios playing out, but we have had some local partners in the internet access world really step up huge, and so that's been much appreciated. We've had a lot of questions about graduation. Obviously, we're going to have the governor and the state health department take the lead of that. We're hearing mainly either a pushback in the date and try to hold it in a creative way, or a virtual type of program. So depending on the locals, they may be doing a drive-through graduation. They may be doing a very lean type of graduation, of participation, but a lot of that's going to be driven by Department of Health and what the governor's orders are as far as gatherings and all those guidelines. Reentry into summer school. Right now, what we have signaled to schools is pretty much plan on an online situation where, again, you get into the inequalities. So who has access to the device, who has access to qualify, or to teachers who can actually run the programs, or to educators to get your hands on the programs, also internet access. That all plays right back into this. So summer school is going to be interesting. Right now, we've not had any plans of on-site summer school. Now, who knows? I mean, a lot of that depends on governor announcements and the state health department, but that would take a deep cleaning. That would take guidance on what kind of health care would be probably suggested at the building level. What does that look like for students and staff and families as far as that, do they wear a mask to school? Do they not? I mean, you get into security concerns right now with that as well. So there's a lot of local superintendents are getting antsy. They're wanting to go back, but they're also very realistic of they don't want to go back at the risk of people's health. So we're watching all that. We have developed a re-entry type advisory group. Rural, suburban, urban, getting ready to launch that, put that out. Soon, I can save Adam a call when you ask. We can get that to you, but not yet. But when we do, we can certainly get that to you. That group's going to be used for, here are the items. This isn't here's how you do it textbook or a handbook. That's not what this would be. It would be more of, here are some items you need to think about. We talked today on our webinar to school leaders as far as if you're planning on using masks, you probably need to plan now on how you're going to get your hands on those. And we're worried about the risk that puts on the supply of who needs them in healthcare right now. But if you wait till August to order something right now, you're not getting that until December. So being smart about cleaning supplies, being smart about, that's bus, that's classroom, that's your cafeteria, the mass amount that's needed. Your training for your staff is going to look different for school safety purposes. Entry of families into your building is going to look different. I mean, there's just so much that it needs to be thought through that I know people are thinking through it. But the athletic piece of it, we have teams that are getting antsy that want to get to their facilities, and understandably so, but that is a whole other level of contact, of gathering, a lot of pieces to consider with that. We also have the fiscal concerns that are coming up with summer school. At this time, we've not heard of any cuts to our summer school, but our current state allotment is $18.3 million. Last year we had a $22.7 million request, so we were short last year. We know we're going to be short again. We're looking at maybe a $10 million deficit based on requests, but we just don't know. We won't know until applications are in and they are due June 1. At that time we will know what we're looking at, but right now we only have an allotment of $18.3 million, and we're going to blow through that fast. So the online piece is probably where most folks are going to go, but not knowing what's going to happen situationally, that may look different. Again, the resources we're providing to schools, free, turnkey, practical, been done at the student independent level, considering the social emotional part, the hardship on families, all that needs to play in. Also, it's different to address remediation gaps versus on grade level standard exposure teaching. So if I'm introducing a standard for the first time, which many of our schools will be because we've missed a quarter of the school year, depending on what they did with e-learning, or I'm reteaching, those are different. And so the determining those gaps and the remediation needs are something that we are working through. We've had a lot of families, interestingly, reach out and say, I'm doing this e-learning. I'm not sure if I'm doing it right or doing it well. How do I know if my child is where they should be? So we have reached back out to districts to try to let them drive that as far as what does that kind of formative assessment or summative assessment, depending on where you're at, what does that look like, and how can you give parents any indication of, is my kid going to be ready to go on to the next grade level, or should I be having the retention conversation? Am I doing this right? Not that there's a wrong way necessarily to do it, but am I being effective? Which I truly appreciate them asking, and I commend them for asking, and I wish every parent would ask that, but realistically, that's not going to happen. But the more guidance we give to families and encouragement and parameters, I think the more helpful it is. So that's another piece of reentry screening. How does it look for summer and for next fall, and go from there. School calendars. Right now, we know a lot of our schools are looking at next year's school calendars. Remember, most of our schools have 180-day requirements, but we have some that have beyond 180 day in their educator contracts, whether it's 182, 185, 188, whatever the case may be, based on what they've bargained. That's how many days beyond the instructional time that educators are required to be in their work capacity. So local decisions, still working on that 180 days, some a little bit beyond, but I know in that people are revisiting what latchkey is going to look like, what those days are going to look like, and how all that plays out. So that reentry, we're going to go right into reentry for 2021. What does it look like? Well, it's going to look back to normal, which I think is pie in the sky, or a little bit like today, where we are just pretty much remote, or a hybrid of you have some on site, some virtual. We've had people talk about shift splitting, where you have a first shift of school and a second shift of school, which is very tricky and very expensive. You have a roll-in entry where you bring different kids back at different times. You roll them in and roll them out. So those 180 days for one teacher may be a chunk of time, another teacher an overlapping chunk of time. The remaining online population, what does that look like? For secondary students, that may look a little bit different because of daycare issues. It's different to tell a sophomore to be at home alone versus a 5-year-old, obviously. And so all those pieces are going to play into, we want to be good partners in getting our economy and our businesses back going, but school's a big piece of that wheel to turn. And so we understand that. And we're trying to, and I know schools understand it, but they have to be smart. They cannot put people in situations that are deemed unsafe. So the daycare service, early grade consideration, all of that is a conversation happening. The next piece is, how do you address that gap, that learning gap that's going to happen? No matter how much e-learning you've had, you're still going to have gaps in learning. And unfortunately, I think those gaps are going to be bigger and bigger based upon the inequity of access to what they need. So whether that's packets, whether that's high tech with devices and internet access, regardless, we're going to have gaps. So first of all, figuring out what those gaps are through assessment, and then targeting those services through the funds that we have at the department and the funds they have locally. It's going to be a targeted type of situation. It has to be, because there's only so many dollars. So people are going to have to, districts are going to be left to target those who need the assistance and really put their efforts behind those students who are struggling. The other piece of it is credit recovery. As far, you have your current 9, 10, 11, that some of them are now behind in credits, and you certainly don't want this to keep snowballing into more and more concerns. So how to bring those kids up or get them into a situation where they can catch up will be critical. Some of them done a great job and they're right on track, but others, even if you've earned the credit, we know there still may be some gaps that we need to address. The other piece that we're hearing about in that gap piece is iRead. Remember, as far as if they would have taken, third graders would have taken iRead this year. If they don't pass it, they get the summer retake opportunity, but then you look at retention unless you're under a special provision. That piece is not here this year because that's been waived. We're trying to get guidance on what happens next year to our current third graders as fourth graders. Do they have to take it? Our hope is iRead 3 goes away. So what we have done is iRead 3 morphing into iLearn 3 with a little bit of information, more information captured, getting our recommendation to the state board staff, to the state board members, and also to the legislators. Because certainly it lives in state board rule, but it's very, very slow to get anything accomplished in state board rule. And my faith in state board rule is probably not what it would be in legislation. So the legislative part is faster, and you got a lot more people in the mix of that. So that would be my suggestion. Obviously, my terms going to play into that from my input side, but right now we can control what we can control and get that information to folks so we can start that conversation. We asked for that last session and we didn't get very far, but now the opportunity's there. It would save money, it would save instructional time, and at a time where Indiana's going to be looking for dollars, I think that would be very, very smart, but we'll see. School calendars, we've already talked about being a local decision. The impact on teacher contracts. This current school year, we do not foresee an impact on teacher contracts. Next year, I know for the following year, remember this spring is the time for the reduction in force, the riffing. Some schools are probably going to be a little bit more conservative with riffing as far as riffing more than they need to, for the simple purpose of they don't know what that's going to look like next year, what their ADM is going to look like, what this is going to bring with the kids that were very mobile. So you will probably see a little bit more, in my opinion, of riffing. Now, if that doesn't happen, great, but I think you will see that, and then they'll be cautious and hopefully try to bring people back. The risk of when you riff is the supply and demand of teachers needed everywhere. But given the circumstances, I understand why people are starting to have those conversations. Hopefully that, where we're at in Indiana, we can keep those great educators in an environment that is good for them and good for our students. But fiscally, we also understand the situation we're under. The impact on our lower socioeconomic school corporations and our rural areas is real. So having said that, so much of this that I've already covered is 100% based upon socioeconomics and rural and where you live, based on if you're out in an area that doesn't have connectivity or the funds aren't good in your school system, or if you're in a big machine like your IPSs and your Fort Waynes and your Evansvilles, it's just different. And so a lot of this has to do with food distribution, and then that's getting very expensive for schools. It has to go back to devices and the technology, and there's so many layers to this that are expensive. And the schools that are going to be hit the hardest with the expenses are clearly those in that rural environment and those in the big suburban or the big urban situations. In my opinion, like we talked about, that COVID-19 has just accentuated the inequalities. And so, we've tried to bridge that with ESSA, which again, Indiana's not embraced ESSA from the policymakers as we would have liked to seen it. But ESSA is our best handle on monitoring that. And we will continue to do that once we get data flowing again. But we're going to use every mechanism we can through the trend data and through what we were using for the Every Student Succeeds Act to target those schools that need the most assistance. We are giving guidance on the CARES Act. That's another way that IDOE has shifted. Adam mentioned the 4 buckets. We've also shifted our operations, obviously, to COVID because it is a very pressing topic. Our school safety division is meeting twice a day, 7 days a week with our emergency operations center. We've got our title that's all focused on new funds. We're working with our division of finance to look at school financing in general. There's a lot going on, but it's very, very COVID focused. We still have priorities that are being addressed, but it just may look a little different. As far as we're not taking our eye off literacy, we're not taking our eye off STEM. So a lot of those initiatives that we had going, they just are looking different right now. Funding concerns, many of you have asked about. Yes, we have funding concerns. We have not had any indication right now that our budget or that our funding will be reduced currently. But we're also realistic that we need to be watching, and we will have future concerns about tax revenue for the state and property taxes and all kinds of things for those who were running referendums, and a lot of fiscal concerns. Increased costs for additional services. Yes, we're asking schools to track their additional costs. And how we are doing that is through FEMA. They had to fill out a form. I have no idea where that will go, but at some point they're being asked now to fill out the form and track it. I have no idea how or if that will be honored or when, but we have been diligent in keep it and make sure the excess costs that are going with COVID are collected. There were a question on reduced tuition support for ADM for 2021. We are not hearing that. However, I think it's early on. I mean, people are trying to figure out how to keep services flowing and not. I think the state budget agency's been very thoughtful in asking some questions, and I know every agency is going to be part of those conversations, but we're not hearing that right now. But I think it's. Again, I'm realistic to know we're going to have some fiscal concerns as a state. All states are going to have it. The CARES Act, we've been asked about the 214, a little bit more than that, almost $215 million. We obviously are distributing that based on the title formula, so every school will get it. Here's the issue with that. Some schools / districts will get $800. Others are going to get $6 million. So it depends on how you fall in the formula. I'm concerned about, everybody thinks this is going to be a huge boost to our districts. Well, proportionally, that's not going to happen. So the CARES Act, although we appreciate it, I know what it is, and I appreciate it for what it is, but given like the last district I was in and looking at those funds, that's not going to get you very far. So it's money, and we can't complain when the feds are giving you money, but I also know too that $215 million spread out amongst a lot of districts and a lot of eligible schools isn't going to go very far. The $60 million from the governor's office, we have been at the table. We've offered our suggestions. That's the governor's decision on how he's going to spend the $60 million. In the big scheme of things, I know $60 million, again, is $60 million, and that is a great, it's good to have that from the feds, but it's $60 million. So in the big scheme of things, when we're running $8 billion and another billion, so $9 billion total for K-12, 60 million's not huge, but every little bit helps. And I know that money's got to stretch because it's touching higher ed as well. So, not holding our breath with a lot of money in that 60 million, but the 215 will go directly to districts through a pass-through through us. We are allowed to keep a 10% set aside of the 215. What we're going to do is target those most at risk. We are working as a team to see what that looks like, but we will have that information based on their continuous learning plans and based on their tech plans that they've submitted and their school improvement plans. So we have a lot of data to make those good decisions. School improvement approach, people have asked for a long time. Our school improvement team has been pretty instrumental, and they will still be, and they still are. They're using ESSA to drive a lot of that. They are also the ones who are reviewing all of the plans that are being submitted to us and offering feedback. Honestly, given the situation, we've been very pleased with those learning plans. As I mentioned, to date, only 53 of them we sent back and said try again. Other than that, they've been pretty good, except for the 11 that are like the outliers that are, I don't know. We're trying to get a hold of them. It's a whole other story. But that piece of it, as far as the school improvement approach, it's been very targeted. Again, we have a limited capacity, just like districts, so it's very, very targeted to our most at risk. We will follow the 4 pillars that Adam mentioned earlier, and we are also working with districts on helping them with the retention, the promotion, the blanket statements that are being made. Some are talking about what do you do with a quarter of school that every child in Indiana pretty much has missed unless you have a very aggressive e-learning program. What do you do with that? Do you roll in next year? So if I'm a first grader and I stopped at quarter 3, is my quarter 4 my beginning of my second grade? So I'm really a second grader, but I'm 1.4 as far as first grade, fourth quarter, and we'll keep that rolling. What does that look like? So a lot of those conversations people have called, but it's very much a local decision. We're just thought partners with some of that and what they can and cannot do. So a lot of good conversations. Personal well-being and SEL of our families. Yes, we realized early on this was beyond the child. In order for the child to be taken care of, their family has to be taken care of, whether that's through meals. We've had schools that are going beyond the call of duty, helping people with unemployment questions. We've had people with telehealth, teletherapy, using their school nurses. We've had all kinds of very interesting situations that have come up, because for most of our districts in Indiana, most of our communities, the school's the hub. It's the connection to a lot, and families, when they have no one else to call, they know they can call a school and they will work their hardest to get them an answer, and that's just who we are, and that's what we've remained doing. So our schools right now are playing a much bigger part than just e-learning academics. We know the social emotional, we know the economic piece of it. We're trying to connect families to those resources that they need and they deserve. So student family well-being has been huge. We are releasing next week, or this week, Super happy about this, a happiness course for kids. So it'll be free to districts and turnkey for grades 6 through 12. That doesn't mean we're ignoring those little guys. That just means they have different resources, but for the 6 through 12, they will have a course. We still have our educator, adult happiness course, but this one is a happiness class for secondary students, and I'm super excited about it. I hope that we have a ton of kids participate. I know as soon as it's released, I think schools will really push it, but it's continuous learning. It's very self-reflective. I think too, it's a good time for that because it's getting. We've heard from more and more families that the novelty of this is wearing off, and people are starting to get a little tired, a little grouchy, a little bit. Very familiar with each other, and that's becoming interesting. So we're hearing about that as far as that relational piece. So I think this is a good time to get something out there that those secondary kids can do a lot of self-reflection. Hopefully they can get some credits for the high school. If schools do it right, there's a possibility of, or if they do it and choose to, there's a possibility to do that. Staff well-being, again, we have had, and with the student and the families, a lot of our educators are doing either daily calls or daily email touches, we call them touches, or at least a couple times a week to make sure that they're okay. That's how we're hearing about a lot of mobility going on, but also the familiarity and the consistency with my child seeing their second grade teacher. It's beyond just the academic piece. It makes their day that their teacher called or that they're on Zoom and they see their friends. And so there's a lot of that, just the well-being, the mental, social, emotional well-being piece of that. Our schools have done a fabulous job. In addition, the staff well-being, they're taking care of each other, a lot of cross-district conversations, a lot of in-district conversations, a lot of webinars through principals, athletic directors, teachers. Our team is doing a lot of supporting of those e-learning chats and webinars, and I think that's been good just to keep contact with people and keep that constant. Unfortunately, as a state, we have had some educator deaths, and so we've had questions on how local schools are dealing with that. That is tough. I know of 3, and I'm sure there are many some that I don't know of, and they have been very taxing on the district and on every school that's been impacted, and they always are, but with an environment where you can't get together and you can't process that in a typical traditional way, it's been very, very difficult. So those are the things that keep you up at night, so some of the things as far as that piece to make sure that the well-being of the kids and how that impacts them, some of the families that were very close to those staff members, and then you have the internal school family that is extremely impacted. So that's happened, that's real. We also have the issue of you have people's family members who are ill, maybe haven't passed, but they're ill and they're dealing with it, which brings a whole other level of complication to what we're trying to do. So having said that, I commend the locals. Sometimes they'll reach out. Sometimes they just need to vent or talk through something. Other times they're trying to, hey, can you think about this and offer some solutions to help the next person that makes it a little easier. So we appreciate all that. The IDOE approach, people have asked, since this is my last year in office, well, so now what? I have no answer for you at this point, but I will tell you we're going to finish strong as far as our team, and hopefully we'll have a lot of our team that will remain here. I'm optimistic in that, realistic in pieces, but optimistic. But we have a great team, and so we will stay committed. We're going to finish strong. We're going to still stay focused on serving kids. It has been an interesting dynamic. I mean, I've learned a lot through the term. This last piece through COVID, I've also learned a great deal. And so is our team, but we'll finish strong and still service the field. The whole holistic government approach, a couple of you ask about that. It truly is, from what it's been refreshing, but I think the part that's been refreshing is the layers of governance have been eliminated. So before, where I would have to, or not just me, but I'm sure a lot of people have to get through many layers of governance to get to a yes or no and spend a lot of time and energy. It seems like a lot of that's gone, and we can be very efficient and very effective in a very short amount of time, and it's been refreshing. I was used to that at the building or the district level. It's been welcomed. So I think that holistic government approach is healthy. I think it's worked so far. No one's looking to be a hero in this situation, or I can say from our department, no one's looking to be the hero. We're just looking to lead and help be part of the solution. We have right now very high customer service. Our team has committed to great customer response time and, getting to yes when we can get to yes, but say no when it needs to be told in those difficult times. But the customer service is very high right now. We are answering hundreds of emails a day still, or phone calls. And I will tell you, our turnaround time is usually a 24-hour or less. We don't always hit it because of the volume right now, but it's all hands on deck, and our communication has been nails. Our communication team, you talk about, districts or agencies that don't put, if they're ever questioning the importance of communication, this is a time where it tells you why you have teams for communications. Our communication from our department has been critical. And when we don't get it right, it's very clear. So when we get it right, we don't hear a whole lot other than thank yous. When we don't get it right, it becomes a little bit noisier. So we work diligently on getting that communication piece right. So when we were asked about the IDOE approach, our approach on this, it's been being a good partner and making sure that communication is spot on, and timely, because people are making decisions. They don't have time for us to wait and play state government. They need answers. We're also still focused on the priorities. I talked about that earlier, and we will remain that way. But as I finish up here, again, questions that you may have that we didn't get to, obviously Adam is available, but I truly, truly thank you for what you are doing during this difficult time, making sure that our families, our educators, our students, and everybody's kept up to date and informed. So I'm going to turn it back over to Adam.
Thank you, Dr. McCormick, for that. As you know, as she said, obviously our staff have been involved with districts and schools and educators and parents and students and just everyone across the state to do what we can. We love our jobs, we love our roles. We're in this for a reason, because we love doing what we can, and as Dr. McCormick said, getting schools to yes when we can. And if it's not yes, it's at least a tangible response and something that will help them move forward. Again, we want to thank all of you. A lot of you have done, all of you have done phenomenal jobs, but a lot of you have submitted questions today, and those questions helped guide this discussion. As we move forward, again, I'm always available. If you have any questions to ask, we'll look at possibly doing something again in the future like this. But we know this time is challenging for everybody, for you as well. And your environments have changed in the way that you've done reporting, and even this is a different method for us altogether. But we want to thank you guys for all you do, for the stories you tell, even the challenging ones that challenge us. Those are great because we need to know sometimes what's going on and how that approach is working out in the public and how we can do a better job ourselves. And so again, we thank all of you. We thank you for helping to tell Indiana's education story. And should you have any questions for this, for anything, you know how to get a hold of me. Do so. And otherwise, take care, be safe, and we'll catch you guys when we do next time. Thank you.
Be safe.